Hey everyone, let's jump right into this explainer. If you are an intermediate first-year political science student, you're definitely going to want to listen up because this is literally one of the important topics you'll tackle this year. We're going to break down what political science actually means today and how it evolved from this ancient philosophical idea into a really dynamic framework that kind of dictates our daily lives.
So, we've got our source material lined up right here. Now, I know it might look like a dense, heavy wall of academic concepts right now, but don't worry, we're going to decode it together. We'll pull out the core meanings, look at some totally different definitions, and map out the massive scope of the entire discipline.
Here's our game plan. We'll start by defining the political sphere itself, then move into the foundations of the state and government. After that, we'll branch out to global institutions and then wrap the whole thing up on the frontier of modern policy.
All right, first things first. To figure out where this whole discipline is heading, we really need to dig into exactly where it began.
You know, the word politics isn't just some modern buzzword we toss around during election season. It actually comes from two very distinct ancient Greek concepts. First up is polis, which basically means the city-state, the physical, living community of people. It's actually where we get modern words like metropolis. And second is polity, which is the actual government or constitution that manages that city-state. So, at its absolute core, political science is just the systematic study of our organized human life together.
Now this is where it gets really interesting. Check out the massive shift in how experts define this field over time. On the one hand, you've got J.W. Garner representing the super-traditional view, saying, political science begins and ends with the state. It's very rigid, right? Focused entirely on the institution. But then, fast forward to Robert Dahl, and he totally flips the script. He defines it as the scientific study of power, authority, and influence. So we move from just looking at static government buildings to studying the invisible currents of power flowing between everyday people. That's a real game changer.
Okay, moving right along to the core foundations. With those definitions floating in our heads, let's zoom in on the absolute center of the discipline.
You've probably heard this iconic quote from Aristotle. Man is by nature a social and political animal. And honestly, he hit the nail on the head. It perfectly illustrates our starting point. You simply can't study government without studying the people being governed. By our very nature, we are completely driven to build communities and navigate power. Politics is quite literally in our DNA.
So building out from the individual, scholars then analyze the state itself. Like, how did it even start? Was it a divine right? Was it born out of brute force? Or maybe it was a social contract, where people voluntarily gave up total freedom just to have some security. And once that state is actually up and running, we have to look at the machinery, the complex dance between the legislature making the laws, the executive enforcing them, and the judiciary interpreting them.
Now you might be wondering, does political science just stop at those official government structures? Well, keeping Dahl's focus on power in mind, absolutely not.
The ecosystem is way bigger than that. We look at informal groups, political parties, NGOs, trade unions, organizations that totally shape what lawmakers do, even if they aren't passing laws themselves. We also weigh the really tricky balance between a citizen's fundamental human rights and their actual duties to society. And then we zoom all the way out to the global stage. We're talking foreign policy, territorial sovereignty, and the crazy balance of power over at the United Nations.
And that naturally brings us to comparative politics. This is where we line up different governments side by side. So, taking a look at India's parliamentary setup versus the USA's presidential system. It's like a giant puzzle. We get to see how different frameworks try to solve the exact same human problems, which gives us a much better perspective than just staring at one single country.
All right, let's step out of the history books for a second and jump into the modern era, where things get incredibly active.
Today's political science is a living, breathing thing. Modern scholars focus a ton on things like political socialization. That's basically how you and I actually learn our political beliefs in the first place. Folks like David Easton and Harold Lasswell, they treat this as a true policy science. They aren't just memorizing old texts. They want to know exactly how public policies are being made and evaluated in the real world. Right now, especially as new 21st century movements keep popping up to challenge the status quo.
So taking all of this in, from Aristotle saying you're a political animal to the highly active modern policy world we just talked about, the big question you've got to ask yourself is, where do you fit into this giant puzzle? Are you just kind of letting the system influence you, or are you actively shaping it?
Well, thanks so much for hanging out with me for this explainer. I really hope this deep dive gave you a rock-solid foundation for your intermediate first-year political science studies. Keep questioning the systems around you, and as always, keep learning with MEGHA Education.